On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant did the unthinkable. It exploded. This wasn't just an accident. It was the single worst nuclear disaster in the history of humankind. So today, we're going to break down the anatomy of that catastrophe, from the fatal flaws baked into its Soviet design all the way to the heroic and devastating aftermath. It's an incredible story of flawed science, critical human error, and just unimaginable sacrifice.
Just to wrap your head around the sheer scale of what happened, get this. The Chernobyl disaster unleashed about 400 times more radioactive material into the atmosphere than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. This was an event completely off the charts.
And for the people right there on the ground, it didn't start with some clear and present danger. It started with confusion, chaos. The very first firefighters who showed up thought they were just fighting a normal electrical fire on a roof. They had absolutely no idea they were walking into an invisible, lethal storm of radiation.
Now, here's the truly terrifying irony of the whole story. This entire catastrophe, the whole thing, was kicked off by a safety test. Yeah, a safety test. The plant's operators were trying to figure out what would happen during a total power failure, a blackout scenario.
The idea was actually pretty clever. They wanted to see if the leftover rotational energy from a turbine that was spinning down could power the reactor's crucial coolant pumps for about 60 to 75 seconds. See, that was the gap. The time it took between the main power cutting out and the backup diesel generators kicking in at full strength. This test was designed to prevent a meltdown, not to cause one. But here's the thing. The reactor itself had this deep, fundamental, and frankly, terrifying flaw. It's called a positive void coefficient. Now, in most reactors, if the cooling water boils and turns into steam, the nuclear reaction naturally slows down. It's a built-in safety feature. But in Chernobyl's RBMK reactor, it was the exact opposite. Steam bubbles, or voids, actually sped up the reaction. It created this horrifying feedback loop. More heat made more steam, and that steam created even more heat, pushing the reactor closer and closer to the edge.
So on the night of the test, this critical design flaw ran headfirst into a whole cascade of human errors. A string of bad decisions and broken rules pushed the reactor into a state it was never, ever supposed to be in. It became dangerously, wildly unstable.
First, the test got delayed for hours, so it fell into the hands of an unprepared night shift crew. Then, a massive operator error caused the reactor's power to just plummet unexpectedly. To try and bring it back up, the operators pulled out almost all of the control rods, which essentially, disabled the reactor's brakes. This left the reactor in this incredibly fragile state, basically a ticking time bomb. So you have this reactor, teetering on the absolute brink of disaster. And that's when the operators decided to start the test. Within seconds, the whole situation spiraled completely out of control, ending with 2 huge explosions that literally tore the reactor apart.
At 1:23 in the morning, as the test was wrapping up, the operators hit the AZ5 button. That's the big red button for an emergency shutdown. For them, it was just a routine step to safely power down the reactor for some planned maintenance. They thought they were ending the experiment, but in reality, they were lighting the fuse.
And this is where we find the second fatal design flaw. The control rods, the very things meant to stop the reaction, were tipped with graphite. So, for a few critical seconds as they were being inserted, these graphite tips pushed the water coolant out of the way, and that caused a massive, instantaneous power surge in the bottom of the reactor. It was like slamming on your car's brakes and having it violently accelerate instead.
And the result? A power spike of truly catastrophic proportions. The reactor's output shot up to at least 30,000 megawatts. To put that in perspective, that is 10 times its normal operational output. Some scientists think it went even higher than that.
All that incredible energy basically flash-boiled the cooling water, creating a colossal steam explosion. This blast was so powerful, it ripped the 2,000-ton steel and concrete lid, the biological shield, right off the top of the reactor, launching it straight through the roof of the building. Just 2 or 3 seconds later, a second, even more powerful explosion happened. This blast completely disintegrated the reactor core itself, shooting tons of radioactive fuel and burning graphite into the night sky. And that started fires all over the power plant. Now, this did terminate the nuclear chain reaction, but at an absolutely unimaginable cost.
So, in the immediate aftermath, a desperate battle began. First responders and plant workers just rushed in to try and contain a disaster they couldn't possibly understand. They were facing an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't smell, and couldn't feel.
The radiation levels were just astronomical. The dosimeters they had on site were useless. They just went off the scale. The real levels in some areas were over 20,000 roentgens per hour. Now, a lethal dose is about 500 roentgens over 5 hours. These poor workers were getting a fatal dose in a matter of seconds.
The firefighters who raced to the scene treated it like any other fire. They climbed onto the roof of the reactor building, walking through chunks of highly radioactive graphite debris to put out the flames. So many of these brave men would die from acute radiation sickness just a few weeks later.
The sheer scale of the response that followed was immense. Over 500,000 people, soldiers, miners, engineers, volunteers, all known as liquidators, were brought in for the crisis management and cleanup. So many of them knowingly exposed themselves to dangerous levels of radiation.
So, to stop the radioactive dust and debris from the exposed reactor from blowing all over Europe, an incredible engineering feat was pulled off. In just 206 days, workers built a giant steel and concrete shelter, the sarcophagus, to entomb the entire destroyed Reactor 4.
Now, those explosions and the fire that burned for 10 days afterwards, they released this huge plume of radioactive material that spread, well, across the entire globe. And the legacy of that fallout continues to impact people's health, the environment, and even global politics, right to this day.
But the contamination wasn't spread out evenly. The winds at the time just happened to be blowing north, which meant the neighboring country of Belarus received a staggering 60% of the total contamination that fell on the Soviet Union. It poisoned huge areas of its farmland for generations.
So what was the true human cost? Well, that's a really tough question. The official direct death toll from the explosion and acute radiation sickness is just 31 people. But the World Health Organization estimates that long-term, there could be thousands of additional cancer-related deaths among the most exposed people. It's a number that's still debated today. Today, there's a 2,600 square kilometer exclusion zone around the plant. It's this eerie place where nature is slowly taking back abandoned cities. And standing over the old, decaying sarcophagus is the new Safe Confinement, an absolute marvel of engineering designed to safely contain the site for the next 100 years while the reactor is slowly, painstakingly dismantled.
You know, it took less than a minute for the reactor to be destroyed, but its consequences are going to last for millennia. The cleanup isn't even scheduled to be finished until 2065, and yet some of the radioactive elements will remain dangerous for tens of thousands of years. It really forces you to ask a pretty profound question. What is the true half-life of a catastrophe? Is it measured in the days it takes to put out the fire, or in the tens of thousands of years it takes to erase a legacy that's written in atoms?